Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special evening edition of Art Forum. If you haven't met me before, my name's David Sequeira, and I'm the director of the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery here in Melbourne, Australia. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I do want to take a moment and invite everybody in this Zoom to ground themselves in the deep knowledge that long before the University of Melbourne was thought of, or the Victorian College of the Arts, or the Fiona and Sydney Meyer Gallery was considered, that for thousands of generations, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, practiced song and dance here. They made sculptures, they made paintings, they shared stories, and they practiced healing here. And it really is with great joy and honour that we acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. Our guest speaker, Rashid Rana. Rashid, we've lost your picture for a moment. Can you put that back on? There we go. I'm just going to introduce Rashid. Pakistan-based Rashid Rana is widely considered to be one of the leading artists of his generation in South Asia today. He is amongst the pioneers of new media art in the region, and Rashid's diverse practice over the years includes dramatically different mediums such as paintings, photo mosaics, video installations, stainless steel and photo sculptures. Notable for distinct pictorial strategies, Rashid first came to prominence through his photo-based works that focused on the relation between the whole and its constituent parts. In these works, he transposes imagery from one time and place to another through manipulation, repetition, and rearrangement. The viewer takes center stage in this deconstruction and acts as the active disruptor in Rashid's transgressions. His work powerfully calls into question the values associated with contemporary art, ritual, aesthetics, social history, and political structure. Over the last 15 years, he's explored these themes further through large-scale video installations that have been shown at major international venues, including the Pakistan Pavilion at the 56th Venice Biennale. Rashid's most recent work, The Facade of the Pakistan Pavilion, celebrating Pakistan's diversity at Dubai Expo, received international acclaim. In 2017, Rashid received the Asia Art Award from the Asia Society, and earlier this year, he was awarded the Sitara-e-Imtiaz, one of Pakistan's highest civilian honours. So it's really with great joy that I welcome Rashid to the Zoom. And the way this evening's going to take place is it's a conversation between Rashid and I, and our intention is that it gives people in the audience, and by the way, a big welcome to people from all over the world who've joined us. It's 6 o'clock in Melbourne, and I know it's about 1 o'clock in Lahore, Pakistan, and I'm not sure what time it is in the other parts of the world where people have joined, but we don't take it lightly that you've joined us. The session tonight will be me talking to Rashid. I have just 5 questions to ask him, and he's going to take us through aspects of his career, and then there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions, and hopefully we'll get through a few of those questions. But Rashid, I'm going to just start off by just, you know, you're an incredibly prolific artist and your work takes many, many forms. And I wonder, you know, it's photography, it's painting, sculpture, installation, video, and architectural collaboration. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it is that you see connects all of these aspects of your work. Like, what are you curious about? Where did it all start?
Hi, David. So good to be here, and thank you so much for your kind and encouraging words. It's really great to be here with your audience, and thank you for the opportunity to share my work with your audience at the gallery. Before I answer your question, I just wanted to make one correction. We don't want to offend anyone. because Gujarat Foundation played a huge role in what we call an unofficial joint India-Pakistan pavilion at the Venice Biennale that you mentioned. It wasn't a Pakistan pavilion per se. It was something aspiring to be a joint subcontinental.
Yes, and this is the project that was called My East is Your West, correct?
Yes, that's the name, and then the name came from the other artist. It was a two-person show, myself and Shilpa Gupta, and the title came from Shilpa's work called My East is Your West.
Great.
And then also, if your colleagues could turn the ringer off whenever somebody's in the waiting room, there's a bell that rings, and if we can get rid of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, regarding your question, yes, I have been asking that question to myself too. Where does this? Sometimes I wonder and question and in fact doubt if as to why my practice is going into so many different directions, and how come I have all these strands within my practice. So time to time I do visit this question myself, and I find different answers. One of the answers perhaps could be that that I get that I provide myself is perhaps I belong to Generation X. I think we both belong to Generation X that has seen more changes, more developments in their lifetime than any other generation in the past. Especially considering this whole shift from analog to digital, we have seen and adapted to it fully within our lifetimes. And I think the way changes, I think these technologies and the way these technologies affect our lives and become part of our lives. So I think art is no exception to that. So I think perhaps this is one of the reasons I have remained open to these possibilities, and the practice has been evolving. The other reason perhaps, if I could think of, let me share my screen if I can share one image with you, is really perhaps my surroundings. You know, if you're part of the global South, the sense of time is not very linear. You can be living, you know, 12th and 19th and 21st century all at the same time. And I'll just share, I mean, it manifests in many different ways. I'm just going to share in one way how it can manifest. I mean, this is a poster seller shop on the curbside in Lahore. And this is how it looks like up close. And this photo is actually, I think 15 years old perhaps. What you see in this photograph, Impressionist works, Renaissance, Disney World, Lollywood, Bollywood, all at the same time. So these serve living museums, you know, for people like me to see these in our surroundings. So I think these inform my practice as well, and lead to the diversity of subject matters that we have witnessed in my work, in my practice. But I think when I see in retrospect, all my practice and different strands of my practice as an art maker, exhibition maker, you know, in terms of my curatorial works, and as a curriculum maker in terms of my role as an educator for all these years, and then most recently another strand of my practice, which perhaps we can discuss later. What connects all of these you know, works of mine and these different forms of production is really, I think, my belief in the non-prescriptive notions of identity. As in, I have an issue with the way geography, as to where you were born, is unnecessarily intersected or connected to how we produce our how visual production takes place, or how the you know, the aesthetics of the work is linked with those identities. So it's, my work is a you know, throughout my practice, I have one way or the other somehow addressed that in my works.
I want to get stuck right into the works themselves, and in particular, I'm interested in those two bodies of work. I love miniatures and the Red Carpet series. And for me, there's a sense of duality in those works. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about duality and your work, particularly in relation to those photo mosaics.
So this time era was talking about early 2000s, and I became really interested in the found imagery and the broad visual culture and popular culture and in my surrounding and also in the remote. So I soon realized that my work doesn't have to be, I mean, I left this obsession of absolute originality behind me. And I assume a new role of editor of images and to form new associations and new meanings. This is, mind you, just the beginning of the age of Google. And we're just beginning to, experience how we can have access to, unprecedented access to tons of images that have been produced in the past or in the recent times. And that I found very fascinating, and I saw potential in just rearranging them to form new meaning and a new association. So this work and the series you're referring to, the dualities, actually, the subject of duality has been present throughout in my practice. Initially, even my works from 90s, early 90s, the minimalist grid-based paintings, where I was interested in the duality of space as a painter, of the pictorial space. And that interest in duality later on expanded into a much, wider sort of understanding of the notion of duality. For instance, in this particular work called I Love Miniatures, where audience, see, in the 90s, late 90s, a neo miniature from Pakistan was very well received within the country and outside the country. And I sort of had wanted to address that or critique that through my practice and through my work. So because basically I felt that if you're an artist from the global south and specifically from South Asia or Pakistan, you're expected to produce works which resembles your past. And so I created a work subversively that resembles the past practices of this region, such as a portrait of a Mughal emperor. And so this is what people see when they enter the gallery. And then they said, oh, wow, miniature painting, was that's what they wanted to see from Pakistan. And they, up close, I showed them what I wanted to see, them to see. And that was all the miniaturized versions of the billboards that existed in the city of Lahore around that time, which was in my immediate surroundings. So hence, I mean, I found through this work something, I mean, I'm not taking pride in the originality of this technique. The mosaics, photo mosaics had existed much before as part of advertisement. And since I was just looking at popular culture and wide visual culture, I found this to be a very fertile, conceptual, and an informal device in my practice to hold all my diverse interest in diverse subject matters. It could very easily hold that through a very simple strategy of micro and macro. So this could leave my audience to knit the narrative between the two polarity of two images, the macro and the micro. And as a result, I felt that it would also help challenge or at least expose the absurdity of presumed absolutes. And that's how, I mean, I think this whole series came about. I mean, and I continued for a few years. And the other work that you mentioned, Red Carpet, is from the same, roughly from the same time. I Love Miniature was 2002, and this one was 2007. 2007, yeah. So roughly around the same period, and I'm using this macro conceptual and formal device here. I mean, this work is about juxtapositions of various different kinds. The whole idea of Orientalist sort of view had taken a whole different angle during the era of war on terror, because Pakistan greatly got affected around that time. Suicide bombing attacks were no longer part of the bordering area with Afghanistan. They actually had arrived to the city where I live, the urban centers such as Lahore. And I think in the media was only interested in those news. And so I just thought it would be interesting if I bring the two narrow views together, and while also accepting that they do exist in some parts. So rather than believing in an absolute presumed, I wanted, all the, bring the layering of all these various polarities. For instance, also the carpet is associated with the handmade and the whole idea of handmade craft, and which, opens a whole different discussion. And then I'm juxtaposing it with how I constructed it, which is digital. So these kind of question this work evokes, and there's a whole story how I arrived to this work, and the work probably genesis of this work took place even before when I went to art school. As a child, I was never comfortable with the animals being slaughtered as a religious ritual. Just to be able to, in terms of seeing it and witnessing it. I mean, I have my own contradictions. I'm not a vegetarian. that is there too. Talking of contradictions and paradoxes. But one thing I noticed, that when the camera became entered between the subject and myself, it became relatively easier for me to digest it, and as opposed to seeing the act directly. That's another thing I discovered through this work.
Rashid, if we move on to the transliteration series, and in particular War Within, it seems to me that in these works you're exploring the validity of history, or perhaps closing the gap between the historic and the contemporary. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I really enjoyed this engagement with the micro and macro in the early 2000s up till 2010, and through the Mosaic series that many of you are familiar with, which actually became kind of my branding, and people know me mostly through those works. But I was interested in this, so I became interested in this whole idea of whole and its parts. And also because of my training as a painter originally, initially, I somehow in my mind, I always remain a painter who is interested in the problematics of the two-dimensional space and all the questions that it comes with, and specifically the surface tension. So I became interested in pushing this idea of the whole and its parts from Mosaic series, where thousands of images form the macro image. I developed this into a slightly different strategy, where I would take, this is all a transliteration series, by the way. So for instance, I would pick an image from another time, another place. It could be from art history, it could be from anywhere else. And I would break it into fragments, digitally, of course, and then reassemble that to evoke the sensibility of an image from another time, another place. This a kind of an act of visual transliteration really made me feel liberated from the dichotomies of East and West and all other kind of dichotomies we live within ourselves. And so I just felt that I can use this history or time as in an allegorical sense. In terms of surface tension, you can see in this work as compared to the earlier Mosaic series, such as Red Carpet, when you're looking at the macro, you're not looking at the micro. You have to go up close. But in transliteration series, just from with just changing the focus of your eyes, you can see the constituent, the micro parts, the fragments. You can recognize them, and you can see the macro at the same time. So it evokes, it generates a different kind of surface tension. I became interested gradually.
So with this image that we're looking at right now, if you could just go back to that, yeah. So this is this Jacques-Louis David? Is that who that is? That
yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, the same as the Oath of Hiroshi.
Yeah, and so what's the image that have you reconstructed that image, that David painting, into something else? Like, is that from the newspaper?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I became interested and fascinated with this idea that I am not, oftentimes I did not delete or repeat any fragment. So it's essentially the same work. It's essentially David's painting, which is about the nationalistic fervor. And I thought that this whole tribal mindset from the early civilization until now, in the age of nation states, has lined through in one way or the other. So I found this reference of David from that period very interesting to portray something from the present day media picture of riots and acts of terrorism. Even with these hard political borders, we have things happening, violence taking place, which I'm referring to with the title War Within. And then just sort of through these two imageries from different times, I'm connecting this whole theme of, trying to connect this whole theme of nationalism and tribal mindset in a way through these different allegories.
Mm.
This is an image, the macro image, if you see it from distance, is after some riots and some car is on fire, and then there's some aftermath of that incident that you're looking at. But essentially, you're looking at that fragments of that painting in smaller parts.
Mm. And then, I mean, I also want to talk about your 3D works, and in particular about Desperately Seeking Paradise, where we've got this very, I mean, its aesthetic kind of refers to minimalism, even though the imagery is incredibly complex. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the shift from 2D to 3D and what interests you about making sculptural objects, if you like.
Well, as I said earlier, I was trained as a painter, and somehow I found new ways of addressing the older questions that I had in mind, and not necessarily through the medium of paint per se. And I found it always very fascinating as to how throughout the ages, from the cave painting until now, whether as a photographer or as a painter or as a videographer, and how various people who engage with two-dimensionality dealt with the two-dimensional surface, because two-dimensionality doesn't exist in nature in that sense, and it's an abstract idea of whether you're creating an illusion of a third dimension on a flat surface or not, or whether trying not to. In both ways, I mean, the whole it's very fascinating to, as a student of history, to see that. So often, sometimes I felt that my practice became with this mosaic series and photo-based works, which I was approaching as a painter. My practice became very idea-driven. I realized that ideas led to the decision of format and medium that I've been using. But then it became, in a way, because there's no absolute thing in this regard, so it became medium based as well, because I was using so much photo content. So therefore, photography or photo content and its history became a subject matter of my work. And in my photo sculptures, I felt that how to expose the limitation of two-dimensional photographic illusion, which we all believe in very much. And the moment you put it in that situation, then I think its limitations are exposed. So this is a whole series photo sculptures where I'm asserting readable, recognizable imagery into the minimalist cube. But this led to works like Desperately Seeking Paradise that you mentioned, which in a way, until that time, this was made in 2008, I think from my career from early 90s until 2008, it kind of brings many of the elements from my previous practice back in a very cyclical fashion, the way my practice has evolved over the years. So what you see from one angle is a geometric abstract sculpture, could be from 1960s America. But as you move around it, then the image unfolds, which is representational, photographic, recognizable, and then it creates the illusion as if a chunk of a high-rise building has been dislocated from its original context and then brought into the gallery space, along with what its surface was reflecting from its urban surroundings. So really representing or depicting verticality as a symbol of sort of assumed symbol of progress, and but when you move around it, then it further unfolds into micro images. When you're up close, and then you can see that this verticality is actually comprising of horizontal images of horizontal sort of landscape, that urban scape that exists in the city where I've lived. So I had developed an archive of facades of low-rise and single or double-story sort of houses and buildings in the city of Lahore where I live in. So in a way, creating different stories of the same story, where I think this is hinting towards the 9/11, where oftentimes it's assumed that religion is considered the cause of that conflict. I think it's the paradise that we all want to have within this lifetime, the economic prosperity. So, I mean, in a way, this work hints at the idea that this sheer uneven economic sort of situation leads to these kind of conflicts and these desires that generate events like 9/11. But in this work, I mean, two-dimensionality and three-dimensionality is confronted, and geometric abstraction versus representation comes into play, along with various other questions.
Mm. I wonder if you could just keep that slide, if you could just go back a little bit, Rashid, just
more.
Yeah, the one before that. Yeah, that one. So that looks, no, not that one, the one before that. Yeah, so that looks like, is that the installation at the Guillemot Museum in Paris? Is that right?
I mean, this work has been shown around many places, in fact, 3-4 continents, but this one I enjoyed the most because it got a new context when it was exhibited at the Musée Guillemot courtyard, where the ancient Cambodian sculptures are there. So the cube was, sitting in the middle of those figurative sculptures and reflecting that as well. So providing a whole new context to the work.
Because I noticed when I was, when I was preparing this session, I noticed how different. I mean, I've never seen this work, in real life, but I noticed how differently this work seemed to, like its capacity to activate space is really, really interesting, because when it's presented in the white cube, it seems to have a very, very different feel to when it's presented with historic objects.
Absolutely. It was meant to be in a, I imagine this work to be always shown in a white cube space. So that's the only way we can show the minimalist view from one angle as you first come across this work. And it's only when you move around it, the readable image becomes apparent after 180-degree walk. But here, another context, as I said, was added in case of music, which I didn't mind actually. And then there's some other works, since you're mentioning the evolution of my practice from 2D to 3D or even 4D. Since my practice became idea-driven, so I was engaging with video works, three-dimensional works, and not to be a video artist per se, not to be a sculptor per se or installation artist. It's just that I think I became comfortable with this idea that I'm a visual artist, and my ideas can take any form or any medium or format. And in this regard, I have to say that I ended up working with other people in the capacity of, you say, as assistants or even as contributors or collaborators. This particular image is with the collaboration with the legendary musician, American musician Steve Reich, response to his his piece from 1965. And I created this visual concept around which Wayne McGregor, who's actually the author of this entire piece, Multiverse, for the Royal Opera House London, so I created this visual concept. And also in this regard, I've curated few shows where I've really discovered this idea of working with other minds, that how one's view of contemporaneity becomes panoramic when you're working with other minds. So I have enjoyed that in various different capacities here. But in terms of, since you asked about the evolution from 2D to 3D, 4D works, this is another work from that period to 2013-14 called A Room from Tate Modern. This particular view is from NYU Gallery in Abu Dhabi. And so I've created a room within a gallery space depicting these white cube spaces that we show in the present era as a subject matter and as an art object, photographically dislocated. So it's basically like a photo sculpture, but except that photo sculpture I first showed you that you can surround, and this surrounds you. And then this led to the work. So one thing led to another. I mean, it just journey was has been very fluid. I mean, to answer your question actually more honestly and specifically. For instance, the project that we was talking about, Venice Biennale, where I really wanted audience from Lahore to be also become part of the whole experience, because I have been living with this in a way we call a guilt, that I was getting opportunity to see overseas, and then I was used to come back and live in Lahore and go travel and exhibit my work elsewhere. I just wanted, I wish that at such mega events such as Venice Biennale, if the audience from Lahore can be participate to this whole thing. So this led to creating a replica of a room of the Palazzo from Venice in Lahore. You're seeing that on the left hand side. So the two rooms became mirror of each other. I mean, mirror is another, mirrors and doubles is also another visual device or a recurring visual element that you'll see in my practice throughout in various different ways. So over here, our walk-in audience on the walk-in basis that entered the pavilion, the Palazzo in Venice, and its replica in Lahore, they sort of saw as if they were looking at the mirror and just one fine morning finding someone else there. So this idea, I mean, gave way to creating a real time based live streaming based video sculptural installation, where actually the audience became the work themselves. So it was really the idea of the desire to expand the idea of viewership for these mega events, which became to lead to all these choices, which I found technical solutions to that. So not the other way around. So as I said, idea driven.
You know, in our conversations, which I have to say have been incredible, I feel incredibly privileged to have had these conversations with you over the last year or so as we've been preparing the exhibition. You know, you describe your practice as both multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. And, you know, I'd love it if you could talk about projects, like just bring us right through to 2022 and bring us through projects like Miner's Store or the Pakistan Pavilion at Dubai Expo, or some of these more recent ones. And in fact, we haven't even talked about your work as an educator at Beacon House National University. So I wonder if you could talk about multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in relationship to your work.
First of all, I mean, I didn't plan this journey, and the surprises that one gets along the way, I think is one's gain as a creative producer, as a creative practitioner. And I could not have imagined my practice to take these turns 20 years ago or 25 years ago. I think what helped is this openness to the staying open to various different possibilities throughout. So parallel to my art practice, as I said just now, that I became comfortable with the terminology visual art, over 10 years ago. Similarly, at this point, although I introduced myself as an artist, and I think it's probably the most apt title and label, and I think it's beneficial, useful. I mean, and I'm comfortable with it. But deep down if you ask me, in my head, when I'm sitting and thinking of ideas, I don't carry this label. I don't tell myself I'm an artist and I'm supposed to produce art. I just let my mind go into whatever direction it goes to, and whatever ideas and whatever kind of manifestation is required to realize those ideas. So parallel to my art practice for the last 10 years or so, I have been thinking of some ideas which were not necessarily art ideas in the strictest sense of the word. And but I let my mind wander, and which then led to, with the help of my team at Venice Biennale, became a curatorial premise where we wanted to have real life projects in the city of Lahore, with the absence of any white cube space, we thought that let's approach this whole idea of creative production in a different way. It was the context which led to that idea, which I ended up not curating for a variety of reasons, not relevant here. But then I developed that curatorial premise with other minds, specifically Madiha Lagari, my colleague, into a manifesto called Earth, a Manifesto of Possibilities. So, but it's not really a manifesto in the strict sense of the word, because I think we're not in that age where we can have a cult-like manifestos which are rigid. So it's more of a subversive idea of a manifesto. It's mostly an invitation to be part of a discussion or a discourse that we can reside outside the discourse of art. Just the very thought of it, I find very liberating, because even with the most radical open-mindedness, within the realm of art, it always seems that as if everything has to become part of art. Even if one is trying to engage with sciences, so the science is becoming part of art. It's like, in very kind of art has its own imperialism. So if just to use the term, in a loose sense. So I thought it'll be interesting if we can initiate a discussion or a discourse which can reside outside the discipline of art, and we can through the history or the present time, we can try to identify those acts which are not mimicking of life, because essentially all what we call art throughout the ages, although art is a very recent phenomena, I really believe it's a condition of history, and it's passing, and it's only been there for the last couple hundred years the most. But we use that lens, and everything we see throughout the history, we call it art. I mean, cave painting, we call it art, and an Sistine Chapel, we call it art, though they were not produced with the intention the way art is practiced now. So, but what if we have another lens that, but all these acts of what we call art are mimicking of life, essentially. So whether it's painting, drawing, video, photography, acting, drama, stage, theater. So they're all mimicking of life. But what if poetics or the creative expression or self-expression is manifesting itself in life itself, through real life actions? One can argue that relational aesthetics do the same within the art, and how relational aesthetics developed and evolved since the arrival of the performance and the happening, is trying to bridge that gap between life and art. But I feel that since Duchamp, any attempt to bridge life between art and gap between art and life further hardens the line and the boundary again around the institution of art. I think perhaps we need to look at other ways of looking at life and self-expression. So any real life action or activity, intervention, mediation, intervention, transaction can be a potentially candidate for being considered as art, the term that I've coined, on the basis of its strength of its expression. So it's a discussion, and it's not rigid. And at the end of this, manifesto, there are possibilities of debate, and things have been left open-ended. So hopefully, in the near future, if we initiate this platform through a blog or online, portal, a curatorial or collective sort of a thing which can generate some sort of debate, we might come up with some other minds can come up with its 0-2 iteration. So art, a manifesto of possibility 0-2. So just to illustrate this, my engagement with this idea of art, possible intended acts of art, I came up with 3 business ideas. They're all planet-wide, aspiring to be, or hinting towards one planet, one country. So again, this consistent interest of mine throughout my career to defy political sort of borders in some ways, and it also becomes part of these 3 works, these 3 concepts that I showed at Manchester International Festival last year, which was a very apt platform, being very multidisciplinary. So created this concept for a chain of grocery stores which leave the baggage of advertisement behind from the 20th century. And then it's like if Andy Warhol took the everyday object to the gallery space, and that becomes art, and the white cubes, courtesy white cube space, as if I'm trying to take the art aesthetics of white cube space back to life. It's that kind of a full circle one is trying to do through this work, which requires a bit of a further discussion, which I don't think we have the time for. Maybe we just wanted to introduce so this was a complete exercise with the help of lots of other minds too, and it was run as a successful business for 1 month, as a real business for 1 month in Manchester. But the actual idea can only be realized if somebody can exercise it at a planet scale, having chain of these stores all over the planet. So instead of making a digital print or a video or an artwork about the notion of consumerism, I felt that I have to run an actual business to convey the same idea through the actual real life activity, where the audience, which are basically the participants, they're not the passive audience, they are actually active participants. They come to buy everyday groceries, and in the process they discover as to how they don't have to pay for the advertisement necessarily, and then they can question various things around the notion of consumerism. And since you spoke about Pakistan Pavilion, yeah, this has been one of the most recent significant projects of mine from last year, where I was invited to transform architecture into art through my intervention. And I took the opportunity gladly, because I felt through this very abstract language, I can perhaps highlight the diversity that Pakistan has to offer. And if the people within Pakistan can start acknowledging that diversity in a positive way, and build that into their strength, and we can have a peaceful coexistence within the country. So what happens in this work, that all these units, rhombus-shaped units, they look similar, but actually they are all unique pieces, both in terms of the size and the slight shift of color, fractionally different from one to the other. And so in a way, referencing to the whole idea of individuality, how all individuals in a collective can also come into together into a harmonious order if the diversity is acknowledged. And if you do not acknowledge the diversity, it can be a messy, chaotic picture as well.
Well, we've come to the end of the session, this part of the session, and I want to throw it open to people in the audience. We've got just a few minutes. If anybody has a question for Rashid, if you could put it in the chat. My colleague June's just enabled the chat, or is about to. If you could put that in, and you know, Rashid, if there's a question that inspires you, you know, feel free to take that on. Does anyone have a question for Rashid?
Shall I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah. There we go. We can see you. Oh, well, Brendan McCleary asks what you're working on right now.
Oh.
Are you allowed to do a spoiler alert?
Yeah, not necessarily, but I can, I can give a hint. It stems from my work for the Earth project, where I presented a concept of a micro city, DIY micro cities, a chain of micro cities all over the world, where different people are just picking up a set of guidelines and creating something suited to their own specific, specificities from that place. And but the whole idea of micro cities. So I have, because of that hypothetical project, I have been invited to actually create something similar to that. So I'm working on that as one of the projects, which I mean, there are other things as well. So my engagement with art making and education, it all continues. But art, I'm getting art opportunities by default since the Pakistan Pavilion and the art project at MIF last year.
Great. Here's a question.
Fascinating, because what I find interesting about this micro city project or urban development project, because I realized when I got involved in it, that how this is the ultimate curation. You're not just designing structures and circulation and all, but you sort of with the help of other minds, really creating a vision how the life is going to be unfolding in this whole process. I think it's really a great learning process and ultimate curation, as I said.
And there's another question that's come through. Hi, Rashid, could you speak more about the nature of your pedagogical work at BNU?
Thank you. So as I responded to your very first question, what connects all my works? It's really my interest in not only liberating myself from prescriptive notions of identity, but to have our next generation do not really get bogged down in dogmatic ideas of identity, because this really happens in the global south, because you sort of start doubting your own creative impulses, where you feel pressured that your work has to somehow justify or has some sort of legitimacy as being authentic Pakistani or South Asian or Indian. This question never comes up with somebody's practice who was born in urban centers of the developed countries, and whatever you produce is seen as innovation. So when I was given a chance to have a my engagement with BNU goes back to 2002, when the university only existed in the feasibility report, and I was invited to develop curriculum and the vision for the School of Visual Arts and Design of this university. So I had a solitary space room with nothing except a table and chair and empty papers, and where I wasn't even sure the ideas I was scribbling will they ever become a reality. So, but at least it gave me idea to take a macro view, super macro view, and bring clarity to my ideas. And actually that fed into my practice, visual arts practice as well. So that goes hand in hand. But there's a difference. In my case, I feel that more I deal with this question of identity, more it hardens that line, and in other words, the critical engagement with the notion of identity becomes your own new identity. Whereas I felt that maybe the next generation should even be liberated from that. They should not having to even face that question. And that's what we did in terms of me and my colleagues, in terms of curriculum and the pedagogical model and structure for the programs over here are designed such that the students lead the way. If you only let the individual flourish and the individual take the lead, and especially the young ones who are ahead of us, and they are probably more have a better understanding of that time, and we play our role as facilitators, and that's really what we're trying to do over here. But and most recently, we're very excited about a new program we offered here called BA Honors IDA, which stands for Interdisciplinary Expanded Design and Arts, where students design their own degree, and they're not limited to or forced to be locating their practice in art or design. It's totally a creative practice based, to this end that they can cull knowledge from sciences, philosophy, social sciences, business, media, from all different forms of knowledge, and expand the notion of what art and design can be from that premise. So it's very taxing, because then engaging with all these strands of one's practice can be time consuming, because they're only 24 hours in a day. But in the end, it's rewarding because they all feed into each other, or they make me learn, informs my various different kind of strands of my practice.
Look, we've got one more question, and it's the question is, how does art connect to other philosophies of art in the contemporary moment? if it does at all.
Yeah, it does. It does. As I mentioned earlier, that relational aesthetics, one might argue uh, 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 that there is no need, and sometimes friends and colleagues do. They said, "What's the very need of art? How is it different to relational aesthetics? Why can't we have something within? How art can evolve into something like that?" My issue is what I earlier mentioned, that I just find it limiting, that why everything has to be seen from the lens of art. Why can't we have discourses that allows us wider freedom? Art is becoming unrecognizable anyway, gradually. And we will really have to see in the future how this era that we're part of is going to be seen, whether art will exist in the eyes of the future or not in the time that we're living in, or is this just a hangover of 20th century? So therefore, I think we have reasons enough to believe, to at least have this debate. So what I mentioned in that manifesto at the end of the document, possibilities of debate, this is also one of the provocations and questions. Can art resides in art, or can art be also part of art? Because if art claims to be all actions of life, then art can also be seen as an action of life. So it is left open-ended, and then whoever asked this question is most welcome to. These are the kind of minds I think can take this discussion forward, really, because I'm not here to make one decision. If you ask me, I'm more comfortable it being outside the discourse of art, but it's been left open to discussion at this initial phase.
Rashid, we're going to leave it there, but really just thank you for your incredible generosity today, and congratulations on such a stunning career. We are delighted that we have your exhibition Beauty Lies here at the Fiona and Sydney Maya Gallery. If people haven't seen that show, they should come in and spend some time with it. It's quite extraordinary. So really, on behalf of everybody in the Zoom and on behalf of everybody who's going to watch this later on, a giant thank you, sending our love and appreciation for your work and your generosity today. And a big thank you to all of the people who've joined us from all over the world for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. It's been actually a privilege, and I actually enjoyed, this is probably, it helps me to see my practice in retrospect. And this discussion has been super helpful. And just before leaving, I'm seeing a last comment or a question, a long one in chat. I don't think we can address that now since the time is over, but it's coming from our old friend, Chaitanya.
Of course.
And just, big hello. And on that note, bye to all the audience who's here remotely or within this virtual room. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.